Alright, in this video we're going to read chapter 9. If you have the physical book, that chapter starts on page 65. The chapter is called Breaking Barriers. Dorothy Vaughan and her husband saw each other on holidays and occasional weekends. They added 2 more children to their family, and for the younger ones, Newsom Park was the only home they knew. Dorothy loved staying home to take care of the new babies, but there was never a question that she would return to work as soon as possible after the children were old enough to stay with a babysitter. Dorothy's job at Langley provided the economic stability for her family. While Dorothy and her children missed their family back in Farmville, friends from the West Computing office filled the void left by aunts and uncles and cousins. The group from the West Computing became a summertime tradition of organizing a picnic at Log Cabin Beach, a wooded resort overlooking the James River, a segregated beach built exclusively for Black people. Dorothy preferred Log Cabin Beach to Bayshore Beach in Hampton, where a rope divided Bayshore from whites-only Buckrow Beach next door. At Log Cabin, Black families were able to enjoy being outside without colored signs to remind them of their place. Dorothy earned a good salary, $2,400 a year, twice the average monthly wage for Black women in the 1940s. When the laboratory operated on a 24-hour schedule during the war, Dorothy had worked the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, taking care of her family by day and crunching numbers at night. Most of the other West Computers also decided to keep their jobs. The section had outgrown its normal room in the warehouse building, and in 1945 they moved to 2 spacious offices on the first floor of the newly built Aircraft Loads Division building. By providing for the needs of 6 children meant that vacations didn't come along often. Dorothy was frugal. She sewed clothes for herself and her children, clipped coupons, and wore shoes until her feet pushed through the worn soles. She sacrificed for her children. Many evenings, Dorothy came home from work and made dinner for the family. After putting the meal on the table, she walked around the block until the children were done eating. She then ate only the leftovers. She didn't want to eat before she knew that her little ones had eaten all that they needed. A permanent job. The prediction that the end of the war would destroy the economy of Hampton Roads area proved incorrect. A defense industry boom followed the war and lasted decades. Hampton Roads became a military capital. After the war, the Norfolk Naval Base was established as the headquarters of the Navy's Air Command. Next came the Army Transportation School in Newport News and the U.S. Coast Guard Base in Portsmouth. In 1946, the Army decided to make Langley Field the headquarters of its Tactical Air Command, and then the following year, the Army Air Corps became an independent branch of the military known as the United States Air Force. The number of people working at Langley dropped immediately after the war. Most people left voluntarily, choosing to retire or take other work. Many women computers left to return home or marry men they had worked with. Engagement and wedding announcements filled the pages of the employee newsletter, AirScoop. Another popular newsletter feature was Airmail, a listing of birth announcements. The women had to figure out how to balance the demands of family and working on a long-term basis. Some women took time off to take care of their babies, while others quit their jobs altogether. But with the airplane growing ever more important to America's economy and its military, it seemed like Langley might always need talented computers. In 1947, the laboratory disbanded the East Computing Pool and sent the white women who had been working in that office to work in specific wind tunnels. All of East Computing's assignments were reassigned to West Computing. With added work, West Computing remained in high gear. It wasn't surprising that Langley wanted to keep Dorothy Vaughan on as a computer. In 3 years, she had proven herself by handing in error-free work and managing deadlines without complaint. She earned excellent ratings from her bosses and had been promoted to shift supervisor, managing 1/3 of a group that was now made up of 25 women. Specialization. Men often came to the laboratory as junior engineers and were allowed to design and conduct their own experiments. Researchers took the men under their wings, teaching them the ropes. Women, on the other hand, had to work much harder to overcome other people's low expectations. A woman who worked in the central computing pool was one step removed from the research, and the engineer's assignments sometimes lacked the context to give the computer much knowledge about the project. The work of most of the women was anonymous. Even a woman who had worked closely with an engineer on the research report rarely saw her name on the final publication. The engineers assumed it didn't matter. After all, she was just a woman, and many of the men were blind to the fact that a woman might have the same ambitions as a man. Sometimes the computer's work impressed an engineer so much that he invited her to join him working full-time with a wind tunnel group. For the women, this meant an opportunity to get closer to the research and perhaps specialize in a particular subfield of aeronautics. A computer who could not only process data but also understand how to interpret it was more valuable to the team than a pool computer with more general knowledge. Specialization became the key to managing the increasingly complex nature of aeronautical research in the post-war era. Here's an image of the women working on their computing assignments. Sonic boom. Many of the Langley engineers shared the dream. They wanted to design an aircraft capable of flying faster than the speed of sound. And the women at Langley were no exception. They dreamed of this exciting possibility, which was seeming less far-fetched by the day. To pursue this dream, in 1947, a group of 13 employees, including 2 former East computers, were sent to the Mojave Desert in the western part of the United States to establish a high-speed flight research center. Their mission? To build the fastest airplane in the world, one that could fly faster than the speed of sound. The speed of sound is 760 miles an hour. The exact number varies depending on temperature, altitude, and humidity. Scientists used to think that flying faster than the speed of sound was impossible, but they were wrong. Mach 1 is the term for something moving at the speed of sound. When an object is moving this fast, the air molecules in front of the object can't get out of the way quickly enough, so they become compressed and form a shock wave. That shock wave is the noise we hear from the crack of a bullwhip or the firing of a bullet. Scientists weren't sure what would happen to a pilot or his plane if he flew at Mach 1. Some researchers thought that the plane or the pilot would be destroyed by the power of the shock wave, and others disagreed. There was only one way to find out, which was to try it. On October 14, 1947, pilot Chuck Yeager flew over the Mojave Desert in the NACA-developed experimental research plane called Bell X-1, and he pierced the sound barrier for the first time in history. The plane caused a loud noise, a sonic boom, just like the shock wave from a bullet and the bullwhip. But the pilot and the plane were safe. The female computers on the ground verified the data transmitted from the instruments attached to the X-1 on its record-breaking flight. That's Chuck Yeager. At the Mojave Desert facility, the computers who helped with this experiment had the chance to do significant work and get credit for it. They were promoted from computer to the higher position of junior engineer and were named as the authors of research reports, a necessary first step in the career of an engineer. And for a woman, it was an extraordinary achievement. It meant that the whole world could see, or would see, that she had contributed to a worthy piece of research, and that she was an important member of an engineering team. Dorothy Hoover, another black woman who was working in West Computing, was the first African-American woman to leave the computing pool and get a chance at a research job, working directly for an engineer. She had earned an undergraduate degree in math from Arkansas Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal College, and a master's degree in mathematics from Atlanta University, and she taught in 3 states before coming to Langley in 1943. She was excellent at abstract concepts and complex equations. She had been assigned many of the challenging problems and always submitted flawless work. As a talented mathematician with an independent mind, Dorothy Hoover was a perfect addition to any research team. Her visibility with engineers increased with her promotion. She answered the computer's questions and understood complex math so well that she sometimes knew more than many of the engineers in the lab. Section Leader. Dorothy Vaughan was an excellent leader within the West Area Computing Pool. In 1947, one of her bosses got sick and was out of the office for a month. The next year, the boss fell ill again. Then, in early 1949, Dorothy's boss began to act strangely at work. She suffered a mental breakdown and was forced to leave her job. This tragic incident left the computing pool without a leader, but the engineers at the laboratory decided to choose Dorothy to be the temporary head of the entire section. This was the first time an African-American woman had been assigned a management role at Langley. At the time, it was unthinkable for a man to report to a woman. Men were ultimately the people in charge. Women who had an interest in management were limited to heading the section in one of the computing pools or a division with female workers, but they always reported to a man. For Dorothy, the new job was a lot like being at the head of a high school classroom and reporting to a principal who was usually a man. It would take Dorothy Vaughan 2 years to earn the full title of section head. The men she worked for held her in limbo. The laboratory had never had a black supervisor before, and they may have delayed making what seemed like a groundbreaking decision. Dorothy, however, was patient. Her promotion made official when a memo circulated in January 1951. Effective this date, Dorothy J. Vaughan, who has been acting head of the West Area Computers Unit, is hereby appointed head of that unit. Dorothy took on the new responsibilities with confidence. Many of the women in the West Computing knew she was the best candidate, and so did many of the engineers. In time, her bosses realized it too. History would prove them all right. There was no one better qualified for the job than Dorothy Vaughan. And there she is. There's Dorothy Vaughan.